Hi there Star Wars collectors, and welcome to another Bossk's Bounty video, and welcome to episode
Get down to 73
of Ask Bossk's Bounty. This is of course the weekly series that drops every Sunday, which gives you a chance to ask me questions in the comment section below, and each week I do my very best to answer them. So if you do have a question for next week's episode, please leave them in the comment section below, and if you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to drop a like down below. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and then you'll be notified every time I drop a video. Just one thing to mention before we get on to this week's questions is that the bracket run by the SWTVC ended on Instagram the other day, and the grand champion, the winner, was Bo-Katan, which probably isn't a big surprise to anybody, but the good thing is that Hasbro did notice. Some of the people that work for Hasbro have commented both on Facebook and on Instagram about the bracket, and let's face it, there were 64 great characters in that bracket, and it came down to the final one, which was Bo-Katan, but I'm sure that Hasbro are going to see all the other characters that got lots and lots of votes, and hopefully it'll give them an idea of what the community want. So I just thought I'd mention that. If you haven't followed SWTVC on Instagram, make sure you do, and also become a member of John Miko's Facebook group, The Vintage Collection, on Facebook, of course. And with all that being said, let's get on to the first question, and it's from Ed5, a Patreon supporter of mine. So thank you very much for the question, Ed. And he says, another great Q&A. I hope they bring out a Scout helmet too. Question, what figures from the vintage 96 are you still searching for? And do you class Size Snoodle's band as part of the vintage figure line? Alright then, Ed, so to answer your question, here are my vintage Star Wars figures. This is what I have in my collection. And as you can see, I probably have what I consider to be like the run-of-the-mill figures, the middle ground figures. So I'm missing the sort of cheaper figures, like all the Return of the Jedi Jabba's goons, like the Weequay, things like that, which are probably easy to get, and that's probably why I haven't sort of gone after them really. The ones that are in this cabinet I do like to have in, you know, almost mint condition as best as I can probably get. And there's a couple there like Warwick and the Luke Stormtrooper, which are more of the high end, but I don't have any more of the last 17. I do of course have my first 12 here. I do have a Darth Vader, which I need to put in that little slot there. And to answer your question about Size Snootles and the Max Rebo band, I don't really consider them part of the figure line. They're more of like a creature line for me. Ultimately, I consider figures that came on the cards, with the exception of Blue Snaggletooth, because he's basically exactly the same, you know, scale. He's a figure, and he just didn't, you know, he's just in that Sears set, so he didn't come on the card. But that, yep, they're my vintage figures. So as you can see, I'm missing quite a few of the Return of the Jedi ones. I've got the Nikto up there, but you know, Weequay, things like that. And yeah, the really expensive last 17. So it's going to be a job to get them all, but yeah, we'll get there. Oh, I nearly forgot, I do have a Rancor Keeper and Gamorrean Guard down there. I have those in my Jabba's Palace. Another question that involves Max Rebo is from Oriel, and he says, hi Tim, question for next week. Recently I started dipping into the Black Series only for the obscure aliens such as Jackson and Jar Jar. I would really like a Yak Face or the Max Rebo band. Do you think we'll get any of those in the Black Series? So of course it is very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the Black Series, but generally, and I've mentioned this before, I do think the Black Series concentrates on the main characters essentially. So with all the new properties that are coming out, all the new media, you're going to want the main characters from the Book of Boba Fett, from Ahsoka, from Andor, all that kind of thing. It's very difficult for them to find space for the background characters such as the Cantina aliens, the Jabba's goons, and the Max Rebo band. So I wouldn't sort of count your chickens on getting those necessarily, but I do know that there is a rumour going around that Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba will be done, but those are probably the two biggest Cantina aliens going, and obviously we've had multiple versions of those in the 3.75 inch, so it's about time they were done in the Black Series. But you know, to get round to characters like Yak Face and the Max Rebo band, I've got a feeling you might be waiting quite a long time. The Celestial Toy Gazer says, when Hasbro inevitably remake the Attack Commander figure for the vintage collection, do you think they will just call him General Veers? I personally hope they do not. I hope they keep it the same as this. I'm not sure if they'll revisit this figure entirely in terms of this card back. I wish they actually would, because the Black Series one of General Veers is amazing, and you could potentially use the figure for all the other officers as well without his armour on. It'd be superb. Now, of course, in the original Vintage 96, you did have the Imperial Officer or Imperial Commander, which does have the image of General Veers, but just in his officer's uniform. So it's going to be difficult to find out what they're going to do with that one. Will they just do a generic figure and call it Imperial Commander, or will they actually use the image of General Veers and create General Veers? I really don't know. It'll be interesting to find out. I personally hope that they just go down the Kenner route and keep it like it was, but we'll have to wait and see. Bond, James Bond, says, do you think we'll get more Vintage Collection Ewoks? Yes, I do. That's an inevitable thing. It's going to happen. Tebow is apparently coming towards the end of the year. Of course, we're getting Paplu as well. And the big one for me, Chief Chirper. We need Chief Chirper in the Vintage Collection, an all-new Chief Chirper. I think the last one that we got was in the Saga Collection. It needs updating, and he's the man, so give us Chief Chirper. Another question about the Ewoks. Horror Fan says, question for next week. Now that Paplu is in the Vintage Collection, could we possibly see a Bossk Bounty diorama of Paplu stealing the speeder bike from the Biker Scouts? I have no doubt in my mind that when I have that figure in my hand, you will see a little setup similar to this for Ask Bossk Bounty, with the speeder bike with Paplu on it. I mean, who isn't going to do that? Can't wait for that. Don Von Carr says, question for next week. Do you think Hasbro's new plastic-free packaging will affect the Vintage Collection? I did hear a rumour that by 2023 or something, they want to eliminate all plastic from their packaging. Look, the Vintage Collection just cannot be without a card and bubble. It's just impossible. So if they want to continue the line, they've got to do that. I don't see any way around it. To me, there's very little plastic involved in these. You know, it's probably half the amount that you get on a Black Series figure, which they are trying to look at. So I really hope not. Benny Sullivan says, great video, question for next week. Do you think we'll ever get a repainted new Return of the Jedi Boba Fett in his Proto Fett colours? Now, I've put all three of them in front of you here. So this is the Vintage Collection VC09 Empire Strikes Back Fett. We have the Proto Fett there. Oh, and I've just knocked him over. Let's put him there like that. And we have the new Return of the Jedi Fett, which is featured in now my last three Ask Boss Bounty videos. Why not? It's an amazing figure. But as you'll see, the sculpts are slightly different. So this guy, if you look at pictures of him, his armour does match more to the Return of the Jedi Fett, with the pouches on the legs slightly different, no pouches on the belt. Whereas this guy, if I just move his arms, you can see he has the pouches near the front on the belt. So the Proto Fett armour does not have that. So if they were thinking about redoing this guy could potentially be, or at least parts of him could potentially be, the sculpt for him. But I kind of think that this one that we've got is good enough. I don't really see a reason to redo him particularly, but you may disagree. Mr. Applesauce 72 says, hey Bossk, seeing how Hasbro's released the Return of the Jedi Boba Fett in both the Black Series and Vintage Collection, would you like to see the company keep up this sort of production where whichever character gets a Black Series treatment, the Vintage Collection gets one as well? To answer that, I think it's kind of unrealistic to ask that, not because that we just won't get them in the Vintage Collection. I just think the lines are completely different. So if you think about the Black Series, it's got a lot of catching up to do. We've got so many figures in 3 3/4 inch that the Black Series have not got. I take you back to last year when we got the Kit Fisto figure in the Black Series. You know, we already have a reasonably good one of those in the Vintage Collection, so why would we need a new one at the same time as the Black Series get them? So it's unrealistic to ask that. What I would say is that whenever a new character from a new property, for example Bo-Katan, gets done in the Black Series, it would be very nice if the Vintage Collection followed suit and we got them at the same time. But because the lines are at different stages, it's difficult for Hasbro to marry that up and give us exactly the same in both lines, if you understand what I'm saying. My mate Evan from Mile High Ground, who's been on a couple of my live streams, asks, with the success of the reissue of the Slave 1 and to a degree the big Millennium Falcon, would you be on board for Hasbro to reissue vehicles from the Vintage Collection 1 era, Revenge of the Sith Jedi Starfighter, Republic Gunship, etc., with updated paint deco? So I'm not against that at all, so long as we get new vehicles as well. So they've got to sort of balance it out for me. There are certain vehicles that I've missed out on which I do not have. The gunship is one of them. I would love them to re-release that with an all-new paint deco. That would be brilliant. But as I say, they've got to balance it up. They've got to give us new stuff as well. Like a Darth Vader's TIE Fighter would be nice. A Moff Gideon TIE Fighter would be nice. There's lots of things that they could do which I would want from a vehicle perspective, rather than just going back to the original one. You know, I'm sure there's lots of people out there, for example, that would want the TIE Interceptor. That would be a good reissue, I believe. It's a great vehicle. It seems to be quite expensive on the secondary market. The gunship, as you mentioned. But as I said, they've got to balance it out. They can't just repack everything. They've got to give some new stuff as well. Robert Westwood says, question for your next episode. Do you ever feel the hobby is getting away from you? I have almost 900 figures from the original Keller line all the way up to the present, and lately I find myself being all but overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of product that I own. Appreciate all the hard work you and Little Boss do for us, the fans. I can kind of understand how you feel. You know, my little collection room does feel like it's getting smaller because the amount of stuff that I own grows as time goes by. But no, I'm in the camp right now where I want even more from Hasbro. I want more product every year, especially in the 3 3/4 inch line. But I can understand completely where you're coming from. If you've been collecting that long, your collection's massive and it's, you know, bursting at the seams. I can understand how you feel. Matthew Yap says, question for next week, what's better about collecting the vintage collection rather than the Black Series? Okay, so I can only answer this from my opinion, and there's two parts to my answer. The first is if you're a carded collector. If you're a carded collector, I'm of the opinion that this card back looks way better than anything the Black Series give you. It's the original scale. It's just like the Kenner card backs. That's how it's supposed, you know, that's the whole point of the vintage collection, to give you something that replicates what we had back in the late 70s and early 80s. So that's the carded side of things. From a loose perspective, then it's the whole world building aspect of collecting. So, you know, you've got all the vehicles and all the creatures. You know, it's impossible for the Black Series to give you a Millennium Falcon that your figures are going to fit into. It's all about the creatures, all about the vehicles, and you know, essentially, I just think that the Black Series figures, when you display them loose on a shelf, that's what they are. They're like eye candy for your shelf, and you can sort of pick and choose the figures you want. But the 3 3/4 is about building dioramas and world building and the full cantina, the full Jabba's sail barge, you know, that kind of thing. Having an army of stormtroopers, and I do know people that collect armies of Black Series stormtroopers, but man, they must take up a lot of shelf space. Whereas, you know, these guys, you can get loads of them on there. So from my point of view, the vintage collection is just the heritage scale, it's world building, and you've got the card back on top. And of course, the figures are becoming such a high standard to rival the Black Series, you know, from that point as well. Articulation, paintwork, they're getting to the standard of the Black Series now. So why would you want to go to the bigger scale? I just do not know. Fetmatic says, what's up, Bossk and Little Bossk? Here's my question for next week. Will Hasbro finally show us a vehicle this year during April's Fan Fest? I sincerely hope so, my friend. We've had nothing all year so far. It would be great to hear about a vehicle. Maybe it'll be the speeder bike. That seems a logical path for them to go down with the release of the Ewoks and the fact that it's in the Mandalorian and things like that. Owen Brown says, great video, Tim. My question for next week is, do you play video games? And if so, what is your favourite Star Wars video game of all time? I used to really enjoy the Rogue Squadron ones on the N64 and the GameCube. They were my favourite Star Wars games, and probably still are. I do enjoy Battlefront 2, I must admit. I did play all of Jedi Fallen Order, which I enjoyed immensely, I must admit. But right now, video games, the only thing I'm playing is Fortnite with my son. He absolutely loves it, and he's got me fully on board. I'm enjoying it. It's brilliant. The Senate says, question for next week, what are the best websites for vintage collection figures in the UK? I would have to say the ones that I visit the most and buy from the most are In Demand Toys, Comics and Cocktails, and Star Action Figures. They're the main three. Maybe Kapow Toys on occasion, but those three are the main ones that I go to. And Bradley Harvey says, what vehicle do you think we will see this year in the vintage collection? I think I just mentioned that on the previous question about vehicles. I honestly think that the speeder bike is a dead cert. I mean, how can they miss that this year with Paploo coming out, Endor Leia coming out again? You've got the fact that it's in the Mandalorian, loads of different reasons why a speeder bike should be on the cards, and we have a perfect one for them to do, the one that was the Toys R Us exclusive from 2012. It's a brilliant vehicle. And we could have that in white for the Mandalorian and a brown one for the Return of the Jedi. So, as I said before, come on Hasbro, give us a vehicle this year. And not just that one, we want some more as well. Alright then guys, that's it for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to check out my previous videos where I opened some figures from Tungori, and I also did a lockdown video of opening some older figures with my son Little Bossk. Please check out those videos. Drop a like down below if you enjoy them. Thank you very much for watching, and we shall see you on the next one.